Okay, well, evening everyone. It's the last session of the Celtic Way, and we've been looking at a number of themes and issues and people, personalities, and we end by looking tonight at Columbanus, describing him as Ireland's first European and cosmopolitan. Now, you may or may not have heard of Robert Schuman. He was a French foreign minister. He was the key architect of what we now know as the European Union. And as Europe emerged from the devastation and the destruction and the divisions of the 1939-1945 war, the pressing need was for reconciliation and peace building. And this was especially true between France and Germany. Including the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, this was the third time France and Germany had been at war with each other, 3 times in 75 years. The war of 1914-1918 had involved 6 imperial European powers, with only 2 of those empires left standing, but badly dented by 1939-1945. It was another imperial war, a continuation of the earlier one. And by the 1960s, the French and the British empires had also joined the wreckage of history. We described the 2 20th century wars as world wars, but in a way they were European wars. And the world dimension was the hangover from European colonialism. Europe had ruled the world, and after 1945 and into the 1950s, the painful and often violent process of decolonization was taking place. Nations asserted their independence and the right to be free from colonial imperial power. Most of Ireland was the first to break out from colonial domination in 1921. More fully independent in 1949. India and Pakistan broke from empire in 1947, also with partition. Asian and African countries achieved independence from the French Empire in the 50s and 60s. So whether Ireland, India, Pakistan, Vietnam, Morocco, Algeria, or Madagascar, it was violent, it was brutal, and bloody. Eurocentrism has a terrible legacy, and we are still struggling with that legacy in many parts of today's world. Robert Schuman, with others, was painfully aware of the European catastrophe and a broken continent. Something had to be done in Europe, whatever about the rest of the imperially dominated world, and Schuman, who was the French foreign minister, drew inspiration from an early Irish Christian called Columbanus. And in the wreckage of Europe, Schuman described Columbanus as the patron saint of those who seek a united Europe. The vision for reconciling and uniting a deeply divided Europe was a profoundly spiritual one. Spiritual and ethical values underpinned the structural responses to the healing of Europe, and significantly, a great 6th century Irish Celtic saint helped shape post-war energy and vision. There were at least 3 key values or moral ethical principles underpinning the rebuilding, the reconciliation, and the peace building of a new Europe. One was to curb excessive nationalism. A second was to outlaw war. And the third was to embed social justice at the heart of Europe. And Schuman found the inspiration for that ethical vision of a reconciled and peaceable Europe in an Irish Celtic saint. There was much that shaped Columbanus, and in 587 CE he left for mainland Europe. He left Ireland for mainland Europe, and to make such an impact on European culture and life. And here he was, still inspiring peace building and reconciliation in the post-1945 Europe. Columbanus was born in Leinster, and at 17 he left his home to study in a new monastery. The monastery was Cleanish in Lough Erne in County Fermanagh. His teacher was Sinnell, a biblical scholar, who grounded Columbanus in scripture study, as well as grammar and rhetoric. And after study at Cleanish, he returned home, and he returned home to struggle very painfully with his sense of life direction and a sense of vocation. Becoming a monk was a difficult journey for Columbanus. He struggled with that, struggled for a long time with that. We know very little of his uncertainties and his doubts, but it was a struggle, and that sense of vocation did not come to him easily. After returning briefly to Cleanish, he moved to Bangor, to one of the great Celtic monasteries with a big reputation for choral music and being a place of laus perennis, or perennial praise. It is said that they had so many choirs in Bangor that one followed another throughout the hours of prayer 24/7. So praise and choral song and antiphonal chant never ceased, it seems. The monastery at Bangor had been founded by Comgall, whose rule of life and discipline shaped the monastic community there. Bangor was a place of liturgical excellence and prayer and learning. And its great liturgical book, the Bangor Antiphonary, still exists. Unfortunately, it's not in Bangor, but in the Ambrosian Library in Milan. But Bangor shaped and formed Columbanus for work well beyond Ireland. So around 587 CE, he left Bangor for mainland Europe with 12 friends. Not sure if that is a literary construction. 12 disciples, echoing some biblical story. But anyway, he left for mainland Europe, it is said, with 12 friends, not consciously as missionaries, but rather maybe in the Celtic tradition, as exiles for the sake of Christ. They went to a Europe where culture and learning had collapsed and faith burned very dim. It was a Europe in crisis. Columbanus attracted many followers. New monastic settlements were established. Columbanus sparked something through his words, his actions, his way of life shaped by Comgall's rule and the rich liturgical tradition which he brought with him from Bangor. Columbanus was shaping faith and life and community in new ways. We know many of the places to which he put him on a boat for Ireland, ordered him to leave, and never return. The boat was shipwrecked, and Columbanus and his friends then took an alternative route and journeyed on through Annagry, Luxeuil, Paris, Metz, Lens, Basel, and Bregenz. And today, Bregenz and Bangor are twinned, brought about by Columbanus. Gall, one of his 12 friends, left the group and founded the monastery and the now Swiss city and canton of St. Gallen. In 614 CE, Columbanus was preaching in Milan and founded his famous monastery quite close at Bobbio in North Italy. And a year later, he died there. Columbanus and these Bangor monks brought learning and culture and faith to a Europe struggling with cultural and spiritual breakdown. His impact in Europe was significant and his contribution lasting. Today, some 34 parishes in Italy are named after him. There is a Columbanus trail from Leinster to Bangor through Europe, people following his footsteps, still attracting many on pilgrimage, making a journey of faith, an outer journey, still inspired by Columbanus. So not surprisingly, maybe, Robert Schumann described him as the patron saint of a united Europe, as a continent struggled to rebuild its life after another time of social, cultural, and spiritual shock and destruction and breakdown. In the second half of the evening, we want to look at Columbanus and his value. But for the moment, Loretto will put us into rooms or smaller groups, and we can engage in conversation with each other. There are a couple of questions. For some reason or other, they're not in front of me at the moment, and maybe Loretto will have them in the chat anyway, and we'll see them come up on the screen as we go towards those groups. So we'll take 20 minutes or so to have a conversation together, except for those of you on the train from Galway. Okay, let's take a look at Columbanus and his values. Now, why did Columbanus have the impact he did on a struggling Europe in the crossover between the 6th and the 7th centuries? And why did he inspire peace building and reconciliation in the broken Europe of the 20th century? I think we were trying to answer some of those questions in the first part. And 2 decades into the 21st century, and it is perhaps true to say that Europe struggles again. And all crises are moral and they're spiritual. The war in Ukraine by Russia is not only illegal, but immoral. And the peace and reconciliation in Europe inspired by Columbanus is now at high risk and in danger of being shattered, especially if Putin activates, as he threatened that he might a week ago in his speech, the nuclear option. The tensions are high between Russia and the NATO nations, including the UK. China has its own game to play, and an emerging power such as India has taken a very neutral stance in the Russian madness. Many Ukrainians, as we know, when we talked about this in part 1, are now just persons fleeing their country, and we have something of around 80 to 100 in relation to refugees and migrants, with a number of countries closing or attempting to close their borders. And much of it is racist. Some of it, let's be frank, is blatantly white supremacist. There are different attitudes and actions towards white refugees and black refugees. And colonialism and slavery have come back to bite the former imperial European powers. And Christianity, which has been so much a part of colonialism and the trade, giving full blessing to Putin's war, including crimes against thousands of children.
Johnston, I don't mean to...
And so Christianity is in serious decline and crisis in Europe,
Johnston,
especially
can you hear me okay?
Western Europe. And the crisis is now also in... Sorry?
Johnston, I'm going to ask you just to maybe turn your camera off because we're hearing you really badly. Must be just a lot of people on the internet up in Port Stewart.
Turn the camera off.
Yeah, just while you're talking, if you don't mind, that'll help us with the sound.
I'd be happy to turn the camera off.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That
That's
might
all
help.
right.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Let's we were talking about Kirill, the Russian leader, who has given his full blessing and support to Putin's war, including crimes against thousands of children. But that Christianity is also in serious decline and crisis in Europe, especially Western Europe. And that crisis is now also in North America and Canada and the USA. And Christianity, if you like, is also disappearing in the oceanic region, those English-speaking colonized countries of Australia and New Zealand. The Middle East, well, it's a political, military disaster, a humanitarian crisis zone, thanks largely historically to the French and the British, and more recently to the Americans and Russians. And then there's climate change that was mentioned in part one, where destruction of so much diversity has put the planet at risk, all of life, and it may not survive. So these are the crises we face and the crises we're living through. And we are, I think, naive to think, or if we think, that as humans we won't allow this to happen, that we have it within us as human beings to turn it around. We might also be naive if we think that this destruction won't happen because God won't allow it, but will intervene and sort out the mess for us. Well, maybe humans by themselves don't have it, and God maybe isn't like that. Anthropology, what it means to be human, and our theology, or what it means to be God, or what we mean by God. Now, Columbanus lived on a big map. He was not defined by the local, and the parochial could not contain him. He wasn't tied to the map as well, and his value base was expansive. Cleanish, Bangor, Milan, and Bobbio all added up to a world, a universal concern, an all-inclusive peace, and a reconciliation without boundaries. Columbanus spoke truth to power. He and abuses of power and justice. And this was the king who escorted him to the coast and told him to take a ship and go back to Bangor and stay there. Columbanus challenged the Pope, no less. He let the Pope know that even the Pope did not have the ultimate authority in interpreting scripture. And Columbanus, by the way, wasn't a Bangor Protestant. Consensus was needed, he told the Pope, if truth was to be realized. And the Pope would only have authority if his principles were sound. Columbanus was in the succession of the Hebrew prophets, an Amos or a Jeremiah. Columbanus embodied something of a critical, dissenting Irish spirit. Some of his sermons are preserved. In Sermon 11, he addresses speech ethics. It is in the context of his concern for preserving peace, because he saw that peace is a fragile gift and easily destroyed. Peace can be lost, he said, by light talk and the slightest injury by another. Personal character and communal peace can be destroyed by harsh or violent speech. We need to train ourselves, he says, suggesting a lifetime discipline of speech. a discipline he believes shaped by love, which is concerned for the well-being of others in social and community relations. What Columbanus is saying about speech ethics applies to personal speech, political speech, religious speech, conversations, Stormont, Westminster, the Dawn, Holyrood, the pulpit, the lectern, the lecture room, the print, sound, visual media, social media. Sectarianism, racism, homophobia, sexism are expressed by hateful, prejudiced, and negative words. Language is powerful, and words do kill. Color-coded references to evil and negativity as being black or dark conveys a destructive message about people whose skin is not white. It may even be the speech of white supremacism. And the frequent and continued use of masculine language in worship and liturgy is more about patriarchal control than we have realized or perhaps admitted. It is speech maintaining patriarchal systems and structures and domination that are all destructive of women's humanity and dignity. And Columbanus ends his Sermon 11 on speech ethics with a ringing affirmation that every human person is made in the image and the likeness of God, and that the divine image in all persons is not to be destroyed or distorted. And the sermon on speech ethics ends with a stirring affirmation of neighbour love and a prayer that Christ, the founder of peace and revealer of the God of love, inspire us with love. The late Cardinal Thomas of Fee described Columbanus as Ireland's first European. He was, and he was more than that. Given the geographical awareness of then, he was global. He possessed no island mentality, as we sometimes do in Ireland, and also maybe on the neighbouring island also. If Columbanus was alive today, he probably would have dissented from any form of narrow nationalism in Ireland, orange or green or English nationalism, or any other confining nationalistic identity. The Christ who shaped his life provided a uniting bond that transcends all boundaries. Words and visions don't come much bigger than this. Columbanus said, "Do not believe that we think of ourselves any different than of you, for we are joint members of one body, whether Gauls, Britons, Irish, or of any other people." That's worth repeating. Do not believe that we think of ourselves any different than of you, for we are joint members of one body, whether Gauls, Britons, Irish, or of any other people. Reading, of course, from a narrow Christian identity base, we could and we might restrict Columbanus to the one body of Christ and the unity of Christian people. But that is how we other people. That is how we create an us and them, a binary, a less human, or saved, unsaved dualism. But that was not the thought world of Columbanus, not the symbolic world he lived in. He was thinking in terms of a transnational, transcultural, transethnic world. Not then, but now, he would, I think, embrace a transreligious world. He has affirmed all humans as made in the image of the God of life, an image, as Genesis affirms, is most fully realized in community. This is the basis of a primary identity, and a commitment transcending cultural, ethnic, gender, national, religious loyalties. We are always more than Gauls, Britons, Irish, Ukrainians, Russians, Chinese, Indians, or any other peoples. Columbanus was not the first to imagine an identity without boundaries. A whole millennium before Columbanus, a Greek, Diogenes, was asked where he came from. We've all been asked that question, and we've often perhaps. Diogenes was asked, and he replied, I am a citizen of the world. I am cosmopolites. We are world citizens. Cosmopolites transcends a specific national boundary and goes far beyond a community-bounded identity. Diogenes refused to identify himself as local or by gender or ethnicity. I am a citizen of the world, a citizen of the cosmos. Cosmopolites. Asian theologian Namsun Kang puts it into contemporary terms. She says, everything the fundamental ethos, embodying the fundamental ethos of cosmopolitan. A citizen of the cosmos is therefore the person, is to the worldwide community of human beings. Kang wrote that in 2013. We need perhaps to widen that again. Our allegiance now is to the planetary community of life. It doesn't mean that being Gauls, Britons, or Irish is unimportant and is discarded. We need, in a sense, local identities and belonging. But we also need that something bigger. We need the cosmic, planetary identities and belonging because it is important to promote and enhance the well-being of the planet as a whole. We are eco-human beings, bound up with a whole community of life. Beyond Diogenes, Columbanus, and Namsun Kang, we are cosmopolites, citizens of the cosmos. Columbanus pointed to it in the 6th, 7th century CE. He lived on a big map, a big ethical map, with expansive and significant values. Cosmopolites, citizens of the cosmos, called and calls for cosmopolitan theology. And perhaps today Columbanus would have been out on the frontier of such theological creativity and beyond. Now, what cosmopolitan or cosmic theology might look like is for another day. If we go to Bangor today, we still meet Columbanus, and we can encounter his significant values. We are to speak and build peace and not destruction, not just locally, but on the planet and among the whole community of life. Columbanus was a big person with a big mind and a big heart and a big God who lived on a big planet, a cosmopolitan. Can I become visible again?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm still distorted. Columbanus lived out of moral and ethical values. Of those he identified, what do you think are the most significant in today's public life? and cosmopolities or what does that mean for us in the world today? And if you want to get into this next question, please do, because I'll be more interested in getting an answer than you might. But what might cosmopolitan theology look like?
Wow.